I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. Are we at the beginning of a millennial revolution? Two authors discuss how this new generation of young voters will remake America.
The millennial generation is often noted for its ability to use technology, particularly social media and the constant mobile phone use and texting and so forth.
Plus, is it a case of old wine in new wineskins? U.S. bishops release a 2012 voters document that looks very familiar. And is it still the economy, stupid? Will voting in 2012 come down to pocketbook issues or to your faith?
It's a teaching document. It's not a voter's guide. It's not an assessment of this candidate versus that candidate and so forth.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's been said that the revolution will not be televised, but if you've been channel surfing through your local newscasts for the past 3 weeks, well, you've undoubtedly been swamped with images of young men and women occupying Wall Street and other venues around the country. So who are those kids protesting the big financiers? Who are this generation's flower children? Well, ladies and gentlemen, allow me now to formally introduce you to the millennial. Millennials have never seen, much less typed on a typewriter. They've never known a world without the internet, and they are the key to America's future. Well, that is at least according to the two authors of Millennial Momentum, How a New Generation is Remaking America. And last night, those authors shared their theory at a talk hosted by Brooklyn's St. Francis College.
Millennials contributed about 17% of the electorate in 2008. They at least have the potential to contribute about 24% now.
The session today at St. Francis is about a new generation of Americans, the millennial generation, Americans born 1982 to 2003. They had major influence on the 2008 election, providing Barack Obama 80% of his popular vote margin, and we are going to discuss their potential impact in the 2012 election.
They've lived a relatively sheltered and protected young childhood. Certainly the events of 9/11 caused their parents to double down on the safety side of life. So that's just a little brief about the parental upbringing that caused this generation to have the attitudes that they do.
The millennial generation is often noted for its ability to use technology, particularly social media and the constant mobile phone use and texting and so forth. But in our book, Millennial Momentum, we talk about how that's a surface behavior, that underneath that behavior is a much more important set of differences in how they behave. Their belief in the group, their commitment to civic activity, their optimism and their can-do attitudes are in fact much more important in the long run than the technology they're so good at. And those values are what cause them to use the technology the way they do, not the other way around.
By a 54 to 39% margin, millennials prefer a bigger government with more services, and those percentages are exactly the opposite of way older generations answer that question. And therefore, you shouldn't be surprised that millennials are the only generation where more people call themselves liberals than call themselves conservatives.
I think millennials are a lot different than the young people in the 60s who might also have been liberal in some ways. I think this is a very pragmatic generation. They recognize that there are big problems, the climate change, the national debt, and they're really eager to pursue sort of assertive problem solving around those.
A generation that's willing to do the hard work, to create compromise, to create solutions to the hard problems that we face. I think, in fact, that we're uniquely qualified to tackle the challenges that we face, like climate change and some of these sort of globalization issues and all the different things that we're up against in a way that no other generation was.
They are emerging, they are very powerful, they are a large generation. 1 out of every 4 Americans in the next election will be a millennial, and so they are a very crucial generation in that regard. They have the potential to really turn things around in this country to make our nation a better nation.
Well, stay with us. There's more currents ahead. A new neighbor moves to America's most famous street, Sesame Street. We'll have that and the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up later, what does it take to be a faithful citizen? Well, we'll find out. But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. A prominent leader in the civil rights movement has died. Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth challenged segregated busing in Birmingham, Alabama, and co-founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He's among those honored at the International Civil Rights Walk of Fame in Atlanta. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once called Shuttlesworth the most courageous civil rights fighter in the South. He survived bombings, beatings, and numerous arrests. Shuttlesworth was in ill health since suffering a stroke several years ago. He died at the age of 89. Well, meantime, another leader in an entirely different civil rights movement has some harsh words for the government of his home country. Archbishop Desmond Tutu held a press conference on Tuesday and called out South Africa's ruling party for refusing to grant the Dalai Lama a visa.
You are disgraceful. I want to warn you. You are behaving in a way that is totally at variance with the things for which we stood. I am warning you. I am warning you that we will pray as we prayed for the downfall of the apartheid government. We will pray for the downfall of a government that misrepresents us.
The South African government is denying accusations that it refused the visa under pressure from China. The Dalai Lama has already canceled his planned visit for this week. He had been asked to speak in honor of Tutu's 80th birthday. Well, as people in the Horn of Africa continue to struggle under the worst drought in decades, Pope Benedict is renewing his call for countries around the world to help. Rome Reports has details.
After the general audience in St. Peter's Square, Benedict XVI made a second appeal to the international community to take more action for the people currently suffering from famine in the Horn of Africa.
Rinnovo il mio accorato invito alla comunità internazionale perché continui il suo impegno verso quei popoli e invito tutti a offrire preghiere e aiuto concreto per tanti fratelli e sorelle così duramente provati, in particolare per I bambini che ogni giorno muoiono in quella regione per malattie, mancanza di acqua e di cibo.
The region has experienced what experts have called the worst drought in 60 years. Currently, more than 12 million people are facing starvation.
Well, hunger is not limited to the Horn of Africa. In fact, the group Feeding America found there are more than 1.3 million people in New York City who also classify as food insecure. That means they, at times, struggle to find food for their families. Well, to bring attention to the plight of the hungry here at home during these difficult economic times, Sesame Street is introducing a new character. The iconic kids show is set to unveil a new impoverished puppet named Lily, whose family faces an ongoing struggle with hunger issues. Lily will be revealed in a one-hour Sesame Street primetime special called Growing Hope Against Hunger, which will feature country music star Brad Paisley and his wife. The special airs nationwide on Sunday. Well, in Washington, reports say the Supreme Court is deeply divided over a case that could have far-reaching implications in church-employee relations. A former teacher at a Lutheran school in Michigan sued her old employer with the help of a government agency. Cheryl Parrish says that she took medical leave for narcolepsy and then showed up wanting her job back. But the school told her that that could not happen because they hired a substitute for the year. The school fired Parrish after she threatened to sue. Analysts say religious groups concerned about their independence and civil rights groups looking out for their employees are all watching the case closely. Elsewhere in the nation's capital, Washington National Cathedral will reopen in November. You may recall the cathedral suffered significant damage from an earthquake in August and a subsequent crane collapse in September. Cathedral officials now say the repairs will end up costing at least $25 million. The cathedral is scheduled to reopen November 12th, just in time for the Episcopal Diocese of Washington to install a new bishop. Well, when you walk into a dollar store, what do you expect to find on the shelves? Maybe off-brand cookies, some hand soap, and a few knickknacks for your home? Well, how about a church? Yeah, 3 Catholic churches in the Windsor, Ontario, Canada area are not literally on the dollar store shelves, but they could be. The Diocese of London, Ontario is offering a 3 for $1 deal for the parishes if they receive the right offer, they say. Officials say the buyer must sign an agreement to not use the facilities for any purpose that doesn't comply with church teaching. Well, a traditionalist group that broke away from the Roman Catholic Church is pouring some cold water now on hopes that it may be coming back into the fold anytime soon. Last month, the Vatican said the Society of St. Pius X, or SSPX, would likely be given the status of a personal prelature, which would give the group a jurisdiction inside the church without geographical boundaries. That was if it agreed to certain church teachings, certain core church teachings. Well, a representative for SSPX said on the group's website this week that reconciliation would be very difficult, very, very difficult, in fact, he said, to attain unless the Vatican grants SSPX the freedom to continue criticizing Rome's, quote, modernist views. Well, locals in one Mexican village have called a truce now following tense religion-based clashes. The Catholic Archdiocese of Puebla and Rocafuerte, a Protestant group, have agreed that Catholics and Protestants should respect each other's religious freedom. Some 70 Protestants fled that village after Catholics, reportedly led by a parish priest, apparently threatened to crucify or lynch them if they remained there. The local government intervened to broker a peace deal. And finally, a musical depicting the days leading up to Jesus' crucifixion is making its way back to Broadway. Producers announced Tuesday that a revival of the Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice musical Jesus Christ Superstar is set to open at the Neil Simon Theater on March 22nd next year. The show debuted on Broadway in 1971 in its original production. It features such songs as What's the Buzz, Superstar, and I Don't Know How to Love Him. Well, stay with us. There's much more currents coming up. Coming up, U.S. bishops attempt to guide the conscience of Catholic voters with a newly released document. Welcome back. Well, it is official. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is out. So does that make room for former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin to jump into the GOP presidential field? Well, new rivals to President Obama notwithstanding, the 2012 presidential campaign is in full swing, and the U.S. Bishops' Conference has released a 30-page statement called Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship to help voters apply Catholic values to a host of critical issues. Well, the statement might look a little familiar, though. It was originally released in 2007, just ahead of the last presidential election. So what's the difference this time around? Well, it is a 2-page introduction signed by an executive committee led by USCCB President and New York Archbishop Timothy Dolan. Earlier today, Currents News Director Ed Wilkinson spoke to one of the 10 signers of the introduction, Albany Bishop Howard Hubbard. He chairs the International Justice and Peace Committee for the USCCB and shared with us the thinking behind this statement and its value to voters.
Bishop Howard Hubbard of Albany, thank you for being with us today.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you, Ed.
Bishop, some people may not be as familiar with faithful citizenship as others. Some people might be a little confused as to what it is. Is it a voting guide, or are the bishops trying to tell us who to vote for? What is the intention of the bishops when they issue this statement, faithful citizenship?
The statement, faithful citizenship, is one of the many political responsibility statements that the bishops have issued since 1976. The most recent one, and the one that we're reissuing this year, was entitled Forming Conscience for Faithful Citizenship. What we seek to do is to provide the fundamental teaching of the Church on social matters and its application to contemporary issues that are facing our nation and our world. This document is not a scorecard, it's not a voter's guide, it's not a direction how to vote. It warns against the misuse of the document to advance any partisan or ideological ends. Rather, it's an effort to acquaint our people with Catholic social teaching and to help to form their conscience when they vote.
The bishops felt that they should have a new introduction with the document, though, this year, and it goes into specifics about certain issues that should be given some priority. Could you tell us about why they picked those issues?
Yes, the original document, Forming Conscience for Faithful Citizenship, summarizes very well the Catholic teaching, and it's a statement that's not linked to any particular election. However, since that document was issued in 2007, there are some issues that have arisen in the contemporary debate to which Catholic social principles should be applied. So, one, we emphasize the importance of religious freedom, including the rights of Catholics to participate fully in public life, and the rights the Church has as an institution to serve those in need without violating our moral principles. We also are very concerned about the budgetary cuts that are taking place both domestically and in terms of our foreign policy, which we believe are falling disproportionately upon the poor. And so we're holding up that issue for special consideration by voters this year. And we are referring to the defense of marriage, as well as the need for comprehensive immigration reform and the importance of protecting life, of course, especially with regard to abortion and euthanasia.
The bishops say, though, that certain issues are intrinsically evil, that they're wrong all the time, and they seem to give a different weight to different issues. Are the bishops saying to us that some issues are more important than others?
We're saying that no one can vote for a person if they support something that is intrinsically evil, in the sense that you cannot vote for an individual for that particular reason. In other words, if you were voting for a person because that person is pro-abortion, then you'll be supporting an intrinsic evil.
Right.
But it's very difficult today to find someone who upholds the Catholic position on every issue. And therefore, when there are people that might support an intrinsic evil and other people who support an intrinsic evil, what is the voter to do? And then you have to kind of balance out in your own mind, am I going to disqualify myself from voting, or am I going to feel that in the overall picture, this candidate is more likely to advance the principles of Catholic social teaching than that candidate?
Yeah, I was going to say that there is no one candidate that would really fit into what we would say is the Catholic position on all these issues. So if somebody's trying to be consistently pro-life, they have a problem. How does faithful citizenship help them make up their mind which way to vote?
Well, faithful citizenship points out what our teaching is, and then asks that people prayerfully seek to form their conscience, and then weigh proportionally, if neither candidate represents the full range of Catholic social teaching, which one would be more likely to advance that teaching than the other.
Bishop, there's a popular notion that when people go to the polls, they vote their pocketbooks. How much influence do you think a document like this has on the general public when they go to the polls?
Well, unfortunately, a recent survey indicated that many Catholics were not familiar with faithful citizenship, and then among those who were familiar with it, many said that it didn't really influence how they voted. So one of the things that we are really working on this year is to develop a whole series of websites and written material that will try to bring this teaching more to the fore and to assist people in using this as a guide to help make their decision as to how they will cast their ballot.
And are the bishops likely to revisit this document, Bishop, and make any further changes in it? Will it come up for debate again in the Bishops' Conference?
As far as I would understand it, this was discussed at the full conference meeting in June, and it was given to the administrative committee to authorize the publication of the document, which we did in September. There's always a possibility that somebody could raise the issue again at our annual November meeting, but as far as I would perceive it, I think that this is the final document.
Okay, Bishop Howard Hurbert, thank you very much for taking some time out to be with us this afternoon.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you, Ed. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ed Wilkinson there, and Bishop Howard Hubbard of Albany, and we appreciate him joining us. Now, you can actually find the Faithful Citizenship Statement right on our website. Go to currentsny.net, click on Riding the Wave there, and you'll find my blog post with the full document and more resources for you right there on your computer screen. Stay tuned, there's much more Currents ahead. When we return, are Catholic voters paying attention to the bishops and their Faithful Citizenship Voters Guide?
My sense from talking to people around the country is Catholics are wrestling with how does their faith shape their politics.
Well, finally tonight, for a person of faith, it may not be good enough just to be a good citizen. A practicing person of faith might also want to strive to be a faithful citizen. And ever since President Gerald Ford faced off against then Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter, U.S. bishops have issued statements just ahead of presidential elections with the goal of providing guidance to Catholic voters on a variety of key moral and social issues. Question is, though, have Catholics been paying attention to their bishops? You know, in 2008, over 50% of the Catholic electorate supported President Obama over Senator John McCain. Many might argue that Obama, who is both pro-choice and supportive of same-sex civil unions, would not have received such a high percentage of the Catholic vote if the Catholic vote was guided by Catholic moral principles. Well, back in September, Fordham University hosted a forum to examine the bishop's statements over the years, their true value at the ballot box, and what it means to be a faithful citizen.
Well, I think they're here because these statements from the bishops every 4 years, although perhaps not widely read among all Catholics, are carefully and intensively read and discussed and even debated among some Catholics.
There are a lot of ways to describe faithful citizenship. Here is what the document said. We are called to bring together our principles and our political choices, our values and our votes to help build a society more respectful of human life, a more just nation, and a more peaceful world.
They've issued statements before the presidential elections every 4 years since 1976. They are trying to spell out some of the major points on which they think Catholics should reflect as they face their political obligations.
So whether we find ourselves more inclined in the Democrat or the Republican direction, I think the Church is right to teach us that we should be acting on our most fundamental values, and that's why we have a document like this. This document represents an assertion by the Church that we want our people, the Catholic people, acting on their most fundamental values.
The whole country's trying to figure out how we get out of this mess, and what tonight was talking about is how does our faith offer us principles and experience that can lead us to a better place. I know I'm being blunt, but we're in trouble as a society, and I believe, more importantly, the bishops believe that the principles, the moral principles, the social principles at the heart of the Catholic faith offer us a way forward. Respect for human life and dignity, the family, community, care for the poor. That's the way forward.
It really is about forming conscience. That is, it's a teaching document. It's not a voter's guide. You know, it's not an assessment of this candidate versus that candidate and so forth. It's a document that's designed in a way to help us inculcate and grow and develop the kind of prudence so that we can be the faithful citizens that it calls us to be.
I feel very strongly that my own well-formed conscience is more important than the bishop's statements because I have great faith in this conscience. I attended Catholic schools all my life, and sometimes some of the bishop's positions are not really in sync with my well-formed conscience, and I'd rather go with my conscience.
I hope there are a lot of people who look to their own consciences and therefore their faith for guidance in how to choose. It's not easy choosing. Tough times for our country, tough times for our church, but my sense from talking to people around the country is Catholics are wrestling with how does their faith shape their politics.
So much election talk today. I can't believe it's we're actually kind of already, getting into election fever, as it were, and the election, the presidential election itself, still like 13 months away. But you'll be hearing a lot more about this, I'm sure, in the months to come. Well, that's it for this edition of Currents. Now, coming up tomorrow, wait, do you hear that? Do you hear that? Oh, I think it's a rumble above the clouds. I think maybe. No, I'm not hearing things. Okay, maybe I am, but just make sure and watch Currents tomorrow. I'm going to reveal the mystery of the rumble above the clouds. Okay, you'll wanna stay tuned for that. Trust me. Until then, be sure and visit us online at currentsny.net. We're on Facebook and Twitter as well. Our Twitter handle is @currentsny. Not a difficult one for you to guess there. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great night.